So imagine we could hit rewind on evolution and play it out a million times. How much do you think the outcomes would really change? Would we still end up with humans at the top of the food chain every single time, or maybe something else entirely, like super intelligent dolphins?
Wow, that is an interesting question. I wish we really could run that experiment. But we are actually pretty close to doing something like that in computational experiments. And for the first time, it requires such a huge amount of computation to run evolutionary simulations that will be anywhere near realistic. And you need to carefully control the environment. You need to carefully control what species are in there and how they interact. And we can't quite do that yet, but we can address some specific questions for specific species at a specific time in evolution, perhaps. And those questions can eventually become perhaps addressable in computer simulations. Now, what would we expect? Oh boy, that if I could answer that, we would need those simulations. But there's a lot of um, e- evidence on convergent evolution in biology that similar solutions are discovered multiple times, like the eye, for instance, a great example. Some people have tried to estimate how many times the eye has evolved, or some version of the eye, and it's very, very many times. It's a high number. And therefore, also, I believe that there will be some convergent evolution that biology will result in beings that are somewhat similar because they are just a good idea. We need to perhaps start in the oceans because that's where, for some reason, that's conducive to elementary life forms, and then there will be a transition to the land because there's more resources there, and these are always happening in parallel. And perhaps the environment, at least at that time, was favoring the land animals. And I could see that that would be reliable result in evolution every time you run it. Now, they probably wouldn't look exactly like we do. There might be different number of fingers or something, but by and large, I think it's reliable. The biggest evolutionary discovery was the runaway evolution of the brain. That animals started with pretty much brainstem, hippocampus related structures, memory and space, and chemical senses. And then for some reason, there was this explosion of the brain, and it was incredibly rapid in terms of evolutionary timescale. So that's a critical point. Would we get that reliably? And would it look similar, or would the organization be different? That's a dicey question to answer. I would really like to have the computer simulations to draw from to answer that, because it looks like it's so quick, rapid, unusual that it could be a rare event. And we don't know what other alternatives there are, and that's why precisely we need the computer simulations.
So, two things. You mentioned convergent evolution, and I read about this in James Lovelock's book Novacine about how any planet with atmosphere would be conducive for wings to develop. So, could you say
Hmm.
more about precisely what convergent evolution is, just for the audience?
Yes, that I'm not the best person to define it because I'm not a biologist, I'm a computer scientist. But the main idea is that because something is so useful, it will evolve multiple times, perhaps, and from different starting points. So the eye is one. Wings, yeah, absolutely, that's another one. Maybe fins for fish or something. I mean, legs so that you can run and jump over obstacles. Something like opposing thumbs so you can grab obstacles. I would imagine that those are really good targets for convergent evolution. And it means indeed that there may be different solutions. Like the eye is not exactly the same in all animals, but the physics and the way and its function are relatively similar. So that I think what it means.
Sure. And you were talking about the runaway evolution of the brain. Would there be a way, instead of kind of making this giant simulation of, starting from 3.5 billion years ago, single cell to or single organism to multicellular organism, and then getting to humans, would there be a
Mm.
way to kind of start at the beginning of, let's say, Homo sapiens or primates, and then
Mm.
see where the runaway evolution could have occurred or could have
Yeah,
started?
yeah, yeah. That may be Yes, that's basically the idea. And there are different communities are looking at different aspects of it. I mean, a life community, artificial life community, there's a whole segment of it that's looking like where the life really started. You know, what were the original molecules that started replicating? But then there's plenty of um, interesting questions to ask about at different stages of that process. And the bigger picture, which is also, I think, soon possible to address with these simulations, is major transitions in evolution, you know, from single cell to multi-cell. And this major transitions have been proposed a couple of times, what exactly they are, but they really are big steps forward. And brain evolution is possibly one that drives it, because there's also communities of animals, people, and then they start forming societies, and then language evolves out of that. It's not just biological evolution of limbs and other things like that, but also the evolution of societies. And to understand how they actually come out, what are determinants, what kind of there needs to be in the environment for, well, multicellular organisms to win over single cells, or somehow groups of proto-humans that work together as a society win over those that are just foraging in small groups. So those are the kind of questions we can ask these computer simulations. We set up the environment in multiple different ways and see under which conditions we get that phenomenon. So one such topic I think is almost ready to address is language. So we will go all the way to simulating intelligent creatures, beings, proto-humans that have perhaps already formed groups and are collaborating in order to find food, shelter, care for the young. They might battle each other sometimes. They might battle other predators. And those are the kinds of things that we can change in the simulation to understand where the communication makes a leap from just simple signaling like shrieks and screams and things like that, and maybe pointing to something that has structure, grammatical structure. And you can start using variable structures and roles. And there's different theories about it. I mean, you don't do this in a vacuum. I mean, there are plenty of people who have looked at origins of language and they have different theories. And now the idea is that we can test those theories by setting computational simulations the way they imagine it happening and see if they actually bear out. So that's one example of that. And you can find other points in evolution and ask other questions, but the way progress needs to be made is to make that question specific, have some different theories, and then evaluate each theory and see which ones hold up in this kind of an environment. It's interesting. It doesn't really prove anything, but it gives us computational evidence for these different theories. And I think that it might, in the very kind of not immediate future, but later, it might be possible to also do some kind of an experiment, some of these questions with animals that like maybe some ape species or something where we could see evolution actually happening over time towards mechanisms that we believe are real, conducive to language. So
Sure.
I think it's exciting time. I mean, this is something that we might see in the next few decades come out, simply because our computational power is so big that we can now take advantage of it and do something like that.
On the topic of the runaway brain and thinking about how humans acquired a different kind of intelligence than the rest of the species or the rest of the life on Earth, it is kind of, I'm not one to, differentiate between man and animal, but it does seem like, we built cities, we built aqueducts, we built ocean-going vessels. And so it does seem like we've had a different kind of intelligence. And so we often think of intelligence as, problem solving or communication, or as we were talking about, the ability to acquire and wield language. But if you had to define intelligence, what would you say in a more precise way? And is there a universal definition, or does it really depend on the context?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not any definition that everybody accepts. But generally, it is that you can interact with environment, manipulate the environment, so that you can enhance your own survival. And that encompasses a lot of different levels and ranges. But it's not just being passive. It is actually actively engaging the environment and other individuals. They belong in the environment as well, your own species, other species, so that you can, perceive, make decisions, react, and in that sense, survive longer and prosper. And there are many solutions to that. And it's interesting that you brought up dolphins earlier. I mean, they are very intelligent. There are other species that are very intelligent. They even have communication, and we find out more and more about it. They understand space. You can talk to them about, I mean, even humans can communicate with these species like the larger apes and also dolphins. Now, one big difference, I think, with humans is that we learn to manipulate the environment a lot more than dolphins can. I mean, they can push things and with their nose and things like that. But we have the opposing thumb, so we can build stuff and you start using tools. And animals use tools too, but it's in a completely different level when you can chop off a rock and make it a knife and start tying things together and so on. And I think that innovation perhaps was one of the major lucky breaks, so that it enabled a lot of other things that other animals like dolphins don't have. I mean, their brain is significant. I mean, it is a very large brain. It's very much convoluted like human brain, and it has a lot of the same structure, but they don't quite have the same rich way of interacting with the environment and build things in it and manipulate it that then gave us the possibility to conquer everything. But humans, at one point, there was a time when there were very few humans and the whole species almost died out. And then you asked the very interesting questions. If they had died out, would there be another branch that would have taken over and done something similar? And it's quite possible that would have happened. And by that time, the foundation was already there, and runaway brain was already happening, and other species might have evolved on that. So it's really hard to point out where exactly the critical bottlenecks are and what exactly the critical ingredients are that you need, and whether life in other planets might have evolved a little differently, or you have more gravity, you have, I don't know, warmer oceans, or you don't have oceans at all, or something like that. So there's a whole branch of biology called astrobiology that tries to address that, life and other environments. But I think that these disciplines have to come together to really answer it. Like, what are the possible environments? And biology, what are the possible solutions? And then computation, not just to have theories about it, but actually test them computationally. That gives us a big advantage. And now I'm just rambling about it because it's a really fascinating topic, but maybe that's another dimension if we point out these major advantages, opposing thumbs being one, runaway brain being another, creating computation being a third one. So now we can actually use computation to answer these questions that we have no access otherwise. And that can, in the future, give us a huge boost also as a species, and how intelligent we can become and how successful we can become.
Does the environment have to be the immediate environment, or can it be something like, I've heard these sayings where, the atmosphere was not created, but it was a certain, level where we could see the stars, where if there was, if it was more dense, we wouldn't be able to look up at the night sky and, ponder whatever that means before with and, language. And so does the environment have to be, the physical landscape, the ability to actually touch something, or does the environment in terms of what we're looking up at, what we can see with our eyes, does that also play a part as well? Do you think that had any effect?
Well, certainly. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. But initially, the most important aspect is just to survive, and that
Mhm.
has to do with the immediate environment. You can't change what the sky looks like. It doesn't, in that sense, affect you, but it may affect you mentally. It may affect your imagination, and that can be a big part of it. But it's interesting how humans have some strange characteristics and traits. Yes, and as soon as you have perhaps built an environment where you can survive, and you can manipulate enough, maybe plant crops, maybe gather food and have shelter, and you basically are safe from predators if you really want to. then there are humans who are looking at the ocean and going, I wonder what's on the other side if I go
Right.
really far. Or that mountain, I never have to go there. I'm perfectly happy. But I wonder what's on the other side of that mountain.
Hmm.
This is like suicidal,
Yeah.
and people still do it, and people still today do it. Like I think it was like what 3,000 people or something signed up to get a one-way ticket to Mars when
Right.
they were selling them. Perfectly fine here, but why would you ever go to Mars? Don't know what's there. It's one way. People have developed some ability to do this kind of exploration, curiosity, and that is why we actually spread out. Didn't stay in the valley in East Africa, but actually spread out. And part of that is just curiosity of what is out there. And the same thing about the stars and heavens. I mean, and we want to know what's out there. We want to actually go there, even if you can send robots and look at them. So that's an interesting trait. Animals, to some degree, I believe, share that too. I mean, there are some results, and indeed, I think dolphins or something, that they are curious too.
Hmm.
They like to explore new objects. Well, you know that even with dogs and cats, perhaps even that you have some experience with that. If they are well fed and happy, they will explore. So that's an important part of it. So it might be inspiration. It might give you an idea that there's more, and then with this kind of a gene of exploration, it will allow us to continue developing.
You said that, we manipulate the environment to enhance survival. And if if that is true, when we're talking about building intelligent artificial agents, is it as simple as programming them to solve problems and
Mm.
survive? Like what is survival in the case of an artificial intelligence agent?
Well, as a designer, you can define it, and in terms of evolutionary optimization or also computation, uh, that is part of the central problem that you solve. What is your fitness function? How do you define it? And your fitness may be that you drive a car and don't crash, or it may be that you play a video game really well and win over other players. You get to define it, and they are really good ways of doing that. Optimizing a power grid, for instance, give it or anything optimization, making decisions about the pandemic, what interventions to do, and you're balancing multiple objectives, even. I mean, multiple fitness functions. So you want to keep people healthy, but you also don't want to restrict the economy too much. So that's what evolutionary optimization in this case. I mean, there are many techniques, of course, but in terms of evolutionary optimization, you specify those fitness functions and those goals, and then evolution will find you solutions that are the optimal trade-offs between them. So that's one way of doing it, but you can also make it open-ended, and you can have multiple populations that are try to outdo each other, and you hope that something interesting comes out, because in these kinds of settings, yes, you can program what you want the agents to do, but it's much more fun, much more interesting if they discover it themselves. If they discover something you don't already know. And that's why I think people are fascinated with machine learning, because they do that. They become better than your designs that you could come up with. You could write code for the self-driving car to do things, but it can learn to do it better if you give it a lot of situations to learn from. And like evolution optimization, ways of exploring the different solutions so you can discover surprises. So yeah, you can program it, but you actually want to build a system that discovers its own solutions so it can do better than your imagination. And then you really added value from machine learning.
I want to touch on the emotions in a second, but you were talking about discovery, and there was this fascinating example of an evolution optimization system that discovered basil can thrive with 24 hours of light,
Yeah,
which previously wasn't known before.
yeah.
Is this kind of a glimpse into how algorithms could help break, the traditional assumptions and help us discover more about our world?
Absolutely. That's why I like that example so much, because it wasn't a computer controlled greenhouse where you can manipulate anything to make the plants grow better. And we were using basil because it grows relatively quickly. And indeed, through this kind of an evolutionary search, we found a surprise, or several surprises actually, but this was the biggest one, that basil doesn't need to sleep, which biologists thought would be natural, intuitive, compelling, they don't even think of exploring beyond, the natural daylight cycle. And this is precisely what evolution algorithms and search and AI and machine learning can do. You have to still set it up so that you allow it to explore. And there's a balance, because if you set it up so that it can do anything, that search space is too big and you may not find anything in it. So you can find things more good solutions more reliably if you narrow it down, if you have some idea where the solutions are going to be. But that then restricts the surprises. So even in this case, the basal, we started with the night-day cycle and noticed that evolution was finding solutions that were pushing at the boundary. And then we broaden the search space and say, okay, have it your way. Try this. You can have 24 hours of daylight if you want. So it probably does require some kind of an interaction like that. You want it to find solutions, but you also want it to allow for surprises. And if you get an idea that, hey, there might be surprises here, then you make it possible. So kind of an interactive search process would get there perhaps. But that is precisely the power of machine learning that we want to utilize to help us discover solutions we might not think of. And this kind of systematic search with a lot of computing power may allow us to do it.
So, not to obviously go against that, but there was this infamous tic-tac-toe memory bomb that happened with an evolutionary algorithm. And is this kind of unexpected creativity a sign of intelligence, the point, or was it just like a glitch or something?
Well, yeah, this was, I believe, referring to the project where we evolved a neural network to play tic-tac-toe, and it discovered that if it made a move to some location on the board, because we didn't restrict the board, it was like million squares away. Every other player expanded memory and until it crashed. And this player won because it crashed all its opponents. Very, very good creativity there. A clever idea. I'd not thought about it. The designers did not think about it, the people who wrote it up. But it is kind of a cheat. And evolution and evolution algorithms are really good at discovering these cheats. And sometimes they are not what you want. They are not realistic. They are not something that you actually want to do. But evolution doesn't know that. I mean, it's just a mechanism. I mean, it doesn't know how to distinguish between what's valid and feasible and what is just taking advantage of a bug somewhere. They're really good at that too. They're good at debugging in a sense, because they discover these loopholes that you then need to plug. But sometimes they are things that are just cute and you don't discover, but there are many other examples where they are actually implementable, and having the lights on 24 hours, yeah, you can do that. It wasn't what we thought. And, controlling a robot, it might discover that it's more efficient for the robot to work on its elbows, for instance, than its hands or feet. And similarly, we had a little satellite assistant that was supposed to be in space and move around using thrusters. And we discovered that we only needed a small number of thrusters, because you could stop on a dime by making a loop and then arresting that turn. So not trying to go and stop, but doing the loop, you could allow it to stop with fewer thrusters. So that's again a clever solution that we didn't know existed, and it's practical because it reduces resources that you need. So yeah, sometimes they are memory bombs, and that may or may not be a feasible solution. But that's what we want the system to do, be creative. Oh yeah, right. So one thing that you do need when you're doing this is perhaps some kind of a simulation or surrogate. You don't necessarily want the system to discover these in the real world, because it could have a high cost. You don't want to experiment with treatments on real patients. You want to have a surrogate for the patient. And once you discover something that is likely to work, then you very carefully test it before you actually deploy it. But now we have so much computing power that high fidelity simulations are often possible. And even if you don't have that ability to simulate from first principles, we can learn a phenomenological model without actually re-implementing the insight. It models what will happen. For instance, in the pandemic, how do the restrictions affect how the disease progresses? We don't have to model contagious people and them getting together. We could, but that's very expensive and very difficult to do. Instead, we can just get data. In
Right.
this country, at this time, this intervention was set, and this is what happened. And that kind of a modeling, predictive modeling, can serve as a very good surrogate in order to find these effective treatments and solutions.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge a sponsor, Jungle Keepers. Jungle Keepers actually didn't sponsor the podcast. I just really like them. I like what Paul Rosalie is doing. And so I thought, why not just tell people to go support Jungle Keepers? Jungle Keepers aims to stop irreversible damage to the Amazon. Paul Rosalie is a massive advocate for this. He's been on Lex, he's been on Joe, and he is really trying to make sure that we save as much of the wildlife, as much of the biodiversity in the Amazon as possible. And I really, connect with that mission. And so this isn't, again, a monetary sponsor. This is just, again, a PSA of save the Amazon, But anyway, back to the podcast. So let's talk about simulations and robots, because there was this thing where robots sometimes are able to deceive each other, like faking a move in a competition. Now, this
Yeah.
may seem, it's interesting on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, it's actually, there's some evidence of theory of mind, because you have to, look at, speaking loosely, what the other person is thinking, or predict what they're thinking in order to make that move to deceive them. So do you think this type of deception could lead to more complex AI behaviors? Is it evidence of more complex AI behaviors? Or would it be kind of a risky thing to make AI that's potentially too good at lying?
Yeah. Yeah. That was an interesting study, because you could see like the inkling of theory of mind, understanding what other agents might do. Um, it's nowhere near the theory of mind that we have,
Mhm.
understanding how people respond and what their motivations are. But you could see how theory of mind could develop if we can increase the complexity of these interactions. It could come from simply this ability to predict what will happen. Part of the prediction is to predict, what your opponent will do. And when you become better and better at predicting, maybe conceptually somehow the prediction involves opponent modeling. We're already doing that in game playing, many games. Poker, for instance, has benefited a lot on opponent modeling, understanding how the opponent player likes to play, whether it's tight or loose, or aggressive, passive, risk avoidant. That allows you to make more efficient plays yourself. And you could think of that as also a rudimentary theory of mind. But how do you actually build and complexify that is still future work. But part of what people do is they are not always honest. And even if they are not being evil, they behave in a certain way while they have hidden agendas. And getting to understand those hidden agendas, even they're not in communication, you can still guess what motivates precise. Well, poker is even a great example of that. You're trying to maintain a poker face. You're trying to make your opponent to make bad decisions. You try to fool them into doing that, and it's rather harmless. It's poker, but in real life, that also happens, in all kinds of activities, economics, of course, military conflict, and
Business.
so it is all over, and it is not something that's discontinuous with everything else. It is part of, interacting with the world, both making those kinds of, if they are benevolent, we wouldn't call them deceptions. You might call them, you have a goal or life theme and you pursue it, even though you don't always make it very clear to your other agents that you interact with. And then it's a continuum. And in the other end, you indeed might be actually deceiving somebody in order to further your own goals. And even that's not so bad unless that this deception actually hurts the other
Mhm.
agent. And that is really the question that we are getting here, I think. You can make these agents act like people, and by and large, that's what to be expected. It's part of being a society. But once they do things like deception and hurt other agents, we don't want that.
Right.
We want to somehow, okay. One big idea or big principle that I really strongly believe is that like what's going on with LLMs now, that we are trying to align them according to our values. That they would not say anything insulting. They would not tell people how to kill themselves or others. And I don't think it's in the long term the right approach. Like trying to tie their hands that they, even if they wanted to, they couldn't. I think it's a much better approach to try to train these models so that they understand what they are doing. They are capable of all those bad actions, but choose not to do them because they have a value system. They know what is expected of them, and they can evaluate what the right action is based on their hierarchy of values. I mean, even Isaac Asimov a long time ago proposed these laws of robotics. And that's kind of a starting point for what I'm talking about. We need agents that and know their value system and know how the actions relate to them and then act accordingly. And that would be a system that's trustworthy and we would somehow be able to deal with the deception problem as well.
I know this is a really kind of strange or broad question, but would emotions play any role in creating values for
Mm,
artificial intelligence? When we talk about AI, people always throw the word around sentient AI.
yeah.
I usually disagree because there's no real evidence that ChatGPT or any of these LLMs have sentience at all. But
Oh.
obviously, we always say, maybe in the future, something like that. So, would emotions be necessary in an artificially intelligent agent, first of all? And second of all, how would they benefit or hinder the agent's actions? Would they
Mm.
contribute to the values or would they take something away?
Yeah. These are really big questions. I mean, I can't pretend to actually have real solutions or answers. I can offer up opinions and thinking about it. Um, I mean, what is the role of emotions in people? What is it in animals? Um, and we have to develop better understanding of that before we can start to really answer these questions. And we did actually a study with hyenas in Africa who were stealing a kill from lions. And a big part of that was a theory that emotions played a large role in that behavior. This is now we are talking about 30 hyenas and maybe a couple of lions who have a zebra they killed and they are feasting on it. But if there are enough hyenas and they coordinate their action and time their action precisely, they can drive the lions away.
Mhm.
Lions are much stronger. I mean, lions can kill a hyena just by hitting them. So they have to work together. And this is an interesting, sophisticated behavior. And part of the theory was that emotions play a large role. They do communicate. I mean, the hyenas do. The hyenas call for reinforcements first. They call for other hyenas to come to once they discover that there are lions with the kill. And once there's enough of the hyenas, they form this bond. They start acting together. They excite each other. There's a lot of affiliation because there's also emotion of being fearful of the lions. So it's an interplay of multiple emotions, and eventually this affiliation emotion becomes so strong that it overcomes the fear emotion, and they can actually act together and steal the kill. So there you can see how emotions can play a role in coordinating a team of hyenas so that they can do something they wouldn't be able to do without these emotions. And that I think is really interesting. So that may be evolutionarily how emotions turned out to be useful, that it allowed cooperation, collaboration, coordination to emerge when communication wasn't yet fully developed. And maybe that's a vestige that we still have these emotions, even though we are not now much more logical. And often emotions get in the way of acting rationally and we might act against our own interests when emotions come and become too strong. So I don't know whether emotions are still useful. A lot of times they are a summary of a lot of inputs that you can't quite process rationally. So maybe you still respond with your gut, and your gut feeling is kind of like an emotion, perhaps. and that might help you cope with very complex situations, especially in relation to other people and other agents. But it is a difficult subject to study. I'm sure there are people who study it and have theories, and we should look at those. Now, whether then we need them in artificial agents is a very good question. It may turn out that emotions indeed are part of the interaction between intelligent beings, at least humans, among humans. And if you have, so you need the theory of mind, but maybe you also need, as a complement of that, you need some kind of emotional response so that you can act according to your beliefs and the summary of the situation, so that it's possible to interact in a natural way, and humans can relate to your actions and can expect and predict what you will do. So that might be a good role for emotions, just to make the interactions more natural with humans. And that can be important. You don't want to be in a different world, a different script. You want to be able to anticipate how your companion reacts, and that's what we want these machines to be, helpful companions. But it's also possible that when they get better, that the emotions are something that you need to control.
Right.
For us, it's a really good thing to do too. But for the machines also, that they know what the appropriate emotional state is, and they can modulate their actions accordingly. But they do have a central executive control that understands that this is just an emotion, and there's a rational response as well, and they can weigh those better. So it's like humans who can control their emotions better, would build something like that. I think that would be a good goal. Have them so that you can have better interactions, but also control them so you can actually be effective in what you need to do.
I have to ask the question because whenever we bring up emotions and AI, people will automatically turn to, AI trying to take over as a result. I'm sure that back in the day there was a human explorer that had given up and, was, at their wits' end, but their emotion of love or something like that propelled them to do more, their kind of self-survival. Do you see this problem? I know it's kind of like a funny question, kind of a taboo question, but for someone that's so close to the technology, is artificial intelligence emotions or not? Is there like this real risk of it taking over? Maybe not in this Hollywood dramatization, but
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question, and we have to now start thinking about it. I mean, just a few decades ago, AI has existed for a long time, for decades, and we've always addressed questions. We had in the back of our mind, we've had the goal of creating artificial beings that are Hollywood-like, hell or
yeah.
data, benevolent hell, not one that goes schizophrenic, but these beings that are actually on par with humans. That's always for a lot of us have been a driving dream to do that. But we have to take baby steps. We have to solve problems we actually can. And it's so hard to do it. It's incredibly difficult. So progress has been always very slow and careful and step by step. And now we've had some major successes. And they were unanticipated. I mean, we were working on neural networks trying to do precisely what works in GPT and large language models and DALL-E and these visual models now. Those kinds of success, we were trying to do it, and in the 80s and 90s, it just was not possible. It wasn't even close to possible. We didn't even see that this would be possible. The same ideas work, and the amount of compute is the difference now. That somehow when we scale them up million times or 4,000 million times, I think, these ideas start to work. And it may be possible that we've captured something about brain-like computation in this scale-up. We don't understand what it is just yet. But now it's interesting that with this success, we've been successful beyond our dreams, kind of. Well, we always had the dream, but we've been more successful than it seemed possible, at least in our lifetime. And now we do have to actually deal with these questions that come up. Now, AI can actually really change the world. Everybody in the world who has access to computer can use AI, and they can write letters, they can write code, they can write recipes, they can do all kinds of things, draw art, put it on their wall, put it in their papers. So AI is in everybody's fingertips, and now questions come up that we didn't think we had to deal with, anytime soon, like copyright, authorship, agency, and indeed consciousness, awareness. Do the machines actually know what they are doing? Do they know what they know? These questions become really real, and it's fascinating. It's wonderful, and it might actually be also a way for us to understand ourselves, the brain and how the brain works, and help medical science in that sense. Now, but these machines have always been built in order to help us work better, and this is what it is right now, and what it will be in the near future. Again, as far as we can see, they are machines that make us more powerful. So whether you are writing an article, it is a tool that helps you write a better article. And you can use illustrations, because now you can use AI to do it. Instead of doing it by hand, you think about what the image needs to be, you describe it, and you can iterate and get something that you could not, most of us could not draw that kind of an image. So it is empowering us. It's much easier to start writing an article when you get a first draft from AI. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. So people can be more creative that way. So at least at the moment and in the foreseeable future, it's a powerful tool that we can use to be better. And it's still the case that it's kicking and screaming. I mean, it is really hard to get these tools to do. You still have to guide them a lot. And in that sense, they are not going to escape and build their own society. They are not at that level of complexity and intention and creativity yet. They depend on us, tremendously depend on us. They won't have anything without us. They are not anything without us. And in the foreseeable future, that's the role. They will always be developed to be our helpful companions. Now, then again, decades from now, if the research proceeds as it has, and we have to understand something about the brain so that we understand something about these machines, and we can make them more powerful and self-aware perhaps, and know what they know. I mean, there's again multiple levels here. Perhaps at first it means that they can recognize when they are hallucinating. That would be a very useful step. But if they recognize that, they might be actually aware of what they know. And then some kind of, like I said, rudimentary theory of mind, rudimentary self-awareness might come out. It's nothing like consciousness, but it is something that is helpful. They can be better tools because they have that. And it is anybody's guess how far we'll have to go, how large these models have to be. And even if we make them larger, would that even emerge? Would that emerge without us actually understanding what consciousness is in the brain? Maybe we have to understand that first before we can build machines that duplicate that or come close to it. Or is it just that we add another million times more compute, and from the complexity it emerges even without us understanding? We don't understand what's in the brain, but we still use the brain all the time and can cope with it. So this is a fascinating array of possibilities. And I can't point out which one will actually work out, but nobody can. But it will be very interesting, and it can have in the future large repercussions, not just building better machines, but also us understanding ourselves.
Right, AI as a tool is fascinating and important. You were saying understanding more about ourselves, but also understanding more about the universe, about what's out there. Now, we were talking about the atmosphere and looking up at the sky and pondering what's out there. And now we have kind of, very, not vague, but working numbers because of the observable universe. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. There's 2 trillion galaxies in it, hundreds of billions of stars and planets all across the night sky, all in the observable universe. But when you're a human and you're thinking about these numbers, they're just numbers. You can't really hold it in your head. You don't have the, I guess, cognitive bandwidth to understand that. So and would AI be able to help us push past those boundaries in our cognition? Or would it be something like, I always refer back to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We get the answer 42, but we may not have the cognitive bandwidth to understand what the questions were. So would it be kind of like that where AI could give us all the answers, but we just wouldn't be able, as biological organisms, to understand them?
Mm. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, but I'm not really sure what we are trying to understand. Perhaps the physics that makes universe function. We have a pretty good start at that, at least. But you pointing out a very good point. Just the scale. I mean, humans are limited to, according to psychologists, 7 ± 2 things in their head at the same time. So if you are trying to understand a process that has 7 variables, that's pretty much your limit. And it's possible that machines could cope with much more. I mean, they're just optimization. You could perhaps turn 7 knobs in order to see what a good solution is, but say evolutionary optimization can do billion variables like that, and that is a different scale. That's optimization, and that's a very useful tool again for us, because we can only manage 7, but we know what those billion dimensions might be. We can ask this tool to optimize it for us. But that understanding of the universe at those numbers, that's a very good question. And we're talking about also life and potentially elsewhere in the universe that's maybe had more time to evolve, has become superior to us the same way as we are maybe superior to some other animals on our planet, at least in terms of reasoning and thinking and so on. And, they wouldn't really care about us because they have so much more interesting things to work on. Um, and again, these machines that we are building giving us that extension that we could actually start thinking at their level. So perhaps they are the high dimensional expansion, but still the values, the goals are something that we can understand and could provide a translation or extension that way. That's a very
What
good question. Yes.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Staying Hydrated. Staying hydrated is actually a great way of staying alive. The human body is about 60% water, so it's a very vital substance for you to ingest every day. 80% of people actually don't drink enough water, enough amounting to around 8 cups per day. So to take advantage of our sponsor, Staying Hydrated, you should probably just drink at least 8 cups per day. This isn't a monetary sponsor, more of like a public service announcement to remind you you should probably drink more water. But anyway, back to the podcast. What about instead of, because there's a lot of friction in using computers right now. I have to open my laptop or I have to use my phone and I have to understand it. But what if I had a brain computer interface, a BCI?
Mm,
You
mm.
know, if we're able to connect our brains to computers, however people think about it in terms of ethically or if it's even possible right now, it is happening. So do you think our minds could handle those limitless
Yeah.
possibilities, those billion dimensions, or would it be kind of like opening too many browser tabs at once?
Yeah, yeah, it's again very good question and possibility for the future. We already have implants like that. I mean, cochlear implants. They are machines that talk to our brain through audition, and they are quite helpful. And they give you a signal that's not the same as your own hearing would give you, but it's useful. And our brains adapt to that, and we can actually develop hearing with cochlear implants. And our brains are incredibly plastic. I mean, there may be some severe cases of epilepsy or some other problem that a baby is born and you have to remove half the brain, and still a human, grows up with half the brain. The functions move to other parts of the brain. The plasticity is tremendous. And there's probably quite a bit of room for interfaces like that. If you had different kinds of sensors. Oh, there's an experiment with swapping the auditory and optic nerves on, I think it was ferrets, some animals, and they can learn to see and listen. Not quite as well as normal animals, but again, brain adapts. So we could possibly also adapt to different kinds of sensors and sensing. And that's really what you're talking about. Information is given to us through channels that we don't normally have. But if you do it early enough, with very young humans, then their nervous system might adapt to that and take advantage of that. And who knows what our capabilities are? Can we expand the 7 ± 2 if we have the right kind of input and interfaces? There's potential. I believe people would acknowledge that there's potential. Now, currently, this kind of technology, we can see how it could be useful in fixing issues, problems, like the cochlear implant or some kind of artificial vision, and maybe even epilepsy and other mental disorders, depression, perhaps with some kind of stimulators and so on, Parkinson's. Alzheimer's is a little different, but we might even cope with that. What's really difficult is to extend normal abilities. You could see, so if you could, for instance, have artificial hearing like cochlea, why not artificial cochlea? Why not just extend that so that a human becomes incredibly sensitive in hearing and selective and all that, and becomes just like, like some animals perhaps that have better hearing, and that just has not been possible. Probably the same with vision. What if you increase the range of wavelengths or just make it hyper accurate? That again has not been possible. So that's kind of a word of caution that maybe if we are trying to artificially extend the range of these abilities we have, the brain is not ready for it, like you pointed out, that we might be overwhelmed. Now, again, these are usually done on adults, I think, where brains are already developed and relatively fixed. They are plastic still. Everybody has plasticity, but not at the level of sensory motor interaction. So if we started early on, it might be possible. Now that's an experiment you won't do. Take anybody's baby and start, modifying the sensory inputs. So it would have to happen because they have a problem and we know how to fix it. And then maybe by fixing it, we could also extend it. But there are such serious ethical and moral issues with that we have to understand. But isn't it fascinating, though, that we are so successful that we have these issues to begin with? And for almost all these questions, because we are talking about very big questions, the biggest one is our own values that we have to develop, a philosophy, a value system that can guide these abilities that we now have and can see within a lifetime can actually be implemented and built. So we need laws of robotics for ourselves, and we have to develop those, and they are moral, they are ethical, they are very high level, and now they become really real.
So let me challenge you because this wasn't in wasn't in the question list, but how do we develop our values? And is there a way to use AI to develop them? Because it feels like, especially right now, we're talking about a lot of technical and a lot of technological and scientific things. But I think if we could use AI to solve like political problems, that would be so much. It would be so much more beneficial. Or maybe I shouldn't compare, but it would be beneficial to society. Solve a lot of the ethical problems as well. I guess there's many questions in this, but why do you feel like values have been declining for so long, or have been at a lower priority for a lot of people, and how do we kind of recultivate that care and passion for really honing those in?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure they've been declining. I mean, people were very nasty to each other throughout our history. I mean, there's been a lot of not so nice behavior. It's only now that we are really starting to pay attention because in many parts of the world, we are so well off that we don't have to struggle to survive. And we can actually try to think about what is right. And for instance, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 development goals to improve the world. Previously, we couldn't afford to do any of it. Now we could, if we choose to do so. And we can so use AI to do it. I mean, we have soon to come a website that actually shows 17 goals and approaches that we could approach them, and different approaches that we could take in order to achieve them, created by AI, plans created by AI, actual actionable procedures and strategies, how we could do it. And AI can be a big part of it. We can take political issues and we can come up with plans and strategies and even procedures, like really concrete steps in how to carry those out. What is standing in the way is the high level values. What do we actually want the world to look like? And then everything that is kind of human hidden agendas and pork and other things that get in the way in carrying it, having to appease voters that are not informed or whatever it is. Technically, it's possible today, at least in specific questions. What's standing in the way is like our social structure. And indeed, above all that is even the fundamental values. What are we trying to optimize? I mean, we conquered the world. Should we optimize so that we go and live on other planets and spread out the universe? And do we want that to be the only objective, or does it also matter that individuals, we are not just Borgs,
Right.
but we are from Star Trek. We are actually individuals, and every individual has a right to do whatever the heck they want to some degree until they start stepping on rights of others. Those are the kinds of philosophy we have to still develop. People have been thinking about it for a long time, but now when we can actually change the world, we can actually come up with procedures that would achieve these goals. We really have to think hard about what those goals are. And they are sometimes conflicting. How do we resolve those conflicts? We have real, like the trolley problem. You can make a decision to save some people but hurt others. How do you make that decision? It's real now with self-driving cars. We have to actually write code, to decide what to do in all those situations that may be very much like the trolley problem. And I think it's a wonderful problem. We've become so successful that we have a lot more to do now. And we need all the philosophy that we can to help us. And I don't have a solution or answer, just saying that this is something that we have to collectively think about. And it's fascinating.
Well, I mean, speaking of the answers to philosophy, it seems like a lot of philosophy is kind of like iatrogenic, or it seems like, philosophy is always an answer searching for a problem. But you were talking about how we have incredibly plastic brains. It does seem like we have an incredibly plastic culture as well. Like the iPhone came out, and within a couple of years, everybody was accustomed to it, sending tweets and whatnot. ChatGPT comes out, and the whole world has started revolving around this darling, for better or for worse. When we're talking about what do we want the world to look like, how can we make that as plastic as possible to get so many people thinking about it? Because it seems it's nice to have these conversations with, you're a very experienced individual, but I want folks my age at 23 years old to talk about this. I want younger folks at 10 years old to start thinking about these things, because utilizing the young creative mind, utilizing those solutions or those ways of thinking, if somebody has been thinking about what they want the world to look like in a positive sense since they were 10, I mean, the way that they will interact with people, government, technology, society will be fundamentally different.
Absolutely. It will be different, and it will be the young people who will shape it. And that's how, surprisingly, I'd say it's not just that they need education in technology. Above all, they need education in critical thinking and ethics, philosophy, because they will have to shape it the way it's never been needed before. And there's a lot to think about, and only the young people can have the perspective, because they know what's possible. They have a sense that everything is possible. For people who are already invested in society and certain ways of doing things, it's much higher hurdle to change things. So it's got to be the young folks who will be doing it. Education is the key. Fortunately, we have now a powerful tool. I mean, internet is accessible to many people. Even if you are in a developing country, you do have access to the same information by and large. And that, I think, is a potentially great equalizer. You still have to have the yearning, the thirst for the information. And what currently is a big challenge is misinformation. There's just so much garbage on the internet that's intended to be harmful and sometimes just intended to be cute and funny. But how do you tell what's true and what isn't, and what's intended to be helpful and what is intended to be harmful? we don't really know how to deal with that. That's been really a big success. That's why I'm saying that critical thinking
Yes.
is the most important skill to develop, because you'll always be exposed to that kind of garbage and have to sort it out for yourself. So that's also a new, we could, when we were growing up, we could trust more or less trust New York Times and, venues like that they would actually compete to be honest and truthful. I mean, that's always not always possible, but there was kind of a ground truth, and we had an idea that there is such a thing. But now we have to question the truth itself.
Right.
Like a GPT or something, a large language model will tell you something. Now, is it factually correct? Well, even that is not always all that clear, because there's always aspects of the world that we don't know, and we have to make some educated guesses and act upon those guesses. So you cannot just say that we only trust facts that have been scientifically verified, because you can't run those experiments all the time, and you have to still work and get work done. So maybe we'll have to start coping with the fact that there's so much information and it has different levels of trustworthiness. At best, we could evaluate what that is and then make an informed choice that is going to be defeasible and probabilistic. And we can try to optimize under uncertainty. But having that kind of thinking is different from what we grew up with, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah. So you have to, this critical thinking is really the most important skill right now to be able to develop.
Absolutely agree. Okay, let's turn back to artificial intelligence and large language models. So neuroevolution and LLMs both aim to push the boundaries of AI. How do you see these two approaches interacting though? Are they complementary or do they hinder each other's progress?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. They are complementary. They are different kinds of technologies, and both are needed. And so we've been working a long time on evolutionary optimization and evolving neural networks from many different perspectives. And part of it is understanding biology, like I mentioned, the hyenas better. But part of it is making better decision support systems so that they empower people. And also, we have a lot of data now from the world, like medical treatments and economic business decisions and so on. And we can learn what works and what doesn't. And then we can come up with mechanisms, strategies that are based on that data. So that's as close to truth as you can get, actual data from the world that you collect, and then make decisions that are optimized. They are optimization. It's optimization under uncertainty. Like I said, your model is based on data. Data is noisy. It doesn't include all the variables because you can't always collect them. And you still try to model it, and you can get to, I don't know, 90% or 95%. That's great. You can optimize it. You're not always correct, but by and large, you can improve. So that's a very standard AI machine. Well, it's not 50 years ago AI. It's not good old-fashioned AI, which used to be logic and rules that are always transparent and you know what's happening. It's still machine learning. It's still statistics-based AI, based on a lot of data. But it is actually quantitative AI in that sense. And now LLMs give us another shape and form. It will be this verbal description of the data, of the behaviors, of the situations and problems. It makes it so much easier to actually take advantage of these other kind of AI systems, because they can serve as translators and access points and explanation systems. So for instance, if we are training a model to make decisions about medical treatment, we can have even text descriptions of what the patient's current state is. What do we know about it? Not everything is quantitative. They might describe how they feel, and that can still be input data that can be now taken in and used as a context. And on the other side, well, we can also use LLMs to fill in gaps in the data, because they have seen a lot of it and they can make best guesses. We can also use it to explain the decisions. They can use it to identify potential risks and biases in our decisions. So it's like much easier to apply these quantitative, even good old-fashioned AI techniques when we have LLMs to serve as an interface to the world. And even see a continuum at the very core of it, that there are tasks that might be much less quantitative and well defined, like decisions, like should I take a nap this afternoon? Well, how do you feel? Did you have a good night's sleep last night? And what do you have to do tomorrow? Things like that, that are very soft, very poorly defined, but an LLM can actually bring involved knowledge that bears on that decision. And that's in one end. And on the other one, you might want to see what is the proper dosage of this drug for this patient. And you have, specifications of the patient's history, and it may be even their DNA makeup. And you have all this data about the drug and how it's used with other patients that are similar and different. And you can make a very precise quantitative prescription of that. And then there's all the midpoints where you're combining both quantitative and qualitative information. So that's how they will work together, empowering each other and giving you an opportunity to address a much broader range of different kinds of problems.
I don't know if you want to talk in depth about it, but you said you had a book coming out on neuroevolution.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Yes. It's we are summarizing and forming a synthesis of, I don't know, maybe 30 years of work on evolving neural networks from all different perspectives, and also how it provides this opportunity and a tool that's different from other tools in machine learning, deep learning, LLMs, image models, and how we can make them synergetic. So yes, we with my co-authors, Sebastian Risi, David Ha, and Eugene Tang, we are doing all that, and it's really interesting because we are providing multiple different perspectives at different stages of our career life and seniority. So everybody has, like I said, young people have a different perspective in how technology will be used in the future, and I have a perspective of how it came about, which is
mhm.
also important to know for the future. So yeah, this is a book on evolving neural networks with evolutionary computation, and that means solving problems like creating behavior, optimizing decision making in particular, also understanding biology and cognition, because we are building brains, artificial brains, neural networks, and we're using evolution, like biological evolution constructed the brains. There's a lot of biology we can understand better and eventually understand ourselves better, as I've said several times. Yeah, and the book is coming out in the next few months, I believe. We also have to create a online supplement. It's not just that it's the written work in a form on a paper, but there's a lot of material that goes demos. You can look at artificial creatures competing and cooperating and get a feel of what actually is being done, and also exercises. So you can learn and build a course on it, and get hands-on experience and evolving neural networks to do various tasks. So that's also important part. It's not just anymore a book. There's all this different kind of media that supports it and gives you an understanding of something that's as complex a topic as evolving neural networks.
Sure. Where do you see the field going in the next, let's say, 10 years? Is this something that's going to get bigger and bigger and eventually go mainstream, or do you think it'll always be, not, I mean this respectfully, but in the background paired with LLMs?
Well, yeah, I mean, the fields come and go, and neuroevolution is definitely something that's been growing slowly, and it's now accelerating.
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason why we wanted to do the book, is to speed it up. We've been doing a lot of tutorials, and conferences have special sessions on it. And now with this kind of a book, it can be a textbook, and people are using it as a textbook, so you can educate people on it. And it becomes part of, like you said, mainstream education in machine learning. I mean, and that's a goal. So where does it go? Scale is really important. So in what we've seen in the last decade or so, all these improvements in AI, a lot of them have to do with compute, the scale of compute that we now have access to. Like I said earlier, we had good ideas in the 90s and 80s, and they didn't really work that well other than demonstrations until we had million times more compute. And now that was deep learning, and now we have about 4,000 more times more compute than we did when deep learning came out. So this, so it's kind of a very high level picture that where we can use compute, we can have breakthroughs now. And that's precisely what neuroevolution is about. We can actually harness that amount of compute. Evolution means that you have a population. The populations can be very large. Each individual there needs to be evaluated. That is computationally very intensive. And then you can have mechanisms that operate in parallel on this population in these environments. So we can perhaps now, using neuroevolution, address questions like emergence of language, emergence of cooperation, collaboration, competition in societies, and start addressing these big questions, building artificial agents that operate like we do because they were actually evolved in similar environments or simulated environments that simulate our world. And they would perhaps develop a theory of mind. And it would come from not by writing code to do it, but letting evolution figure out why that is a survival advantage, why that leads to more complex behavior. So that's what I see the neuroevolution in the future, addressing these very big questions about intelligence. And I believe that it's not really possible to just use coding, programming it, or even data sets from the world. But it has to be systems that evolve through interaction with the world and develop these mechanisms underlying intelligence, like theory of mind, self-awareness, maybe even emotions that could certainly come out of that. And this is a way of achieving intelligence at that level of foundation.
I know we talked about kind of like the Terminator, Skynet, whatever, like Hollywood drama when it comes to AI. Some people subscribe to it, a lot of people don't. Are there any other misconceptions that you see people juggling with AI that you just roll your eyes at or just don't understand? Are we able to set the
Well,
record straight?
yeah, I wouldn't roll my eyes. I'd be just concerned. And yeah, the Hollywood image is unfortunately quite harmful. I mean, people believe that, or many people maybe have the idea that AI can be evil somehow, and that's just not true at all. I mean, AI is what we make it, and it is currently it is a helpful tool, helpful companion is what I've several times mentioned. But it's in our control. You know, we make it what we want, and it will always in the near future be this kind of a helpful tool and companion. So that's one kind of a misconception that hopefully we can get rid of when people actually start using it. When everybody starts using AI, they see what it is. They ask a question and they get an answer, and it's not sometimes correct, and they start understanding that it's not infallible and it's not evil. It's actually trying to help you. So I hope that will be something that we can get rid of. It would be nice to have a few movies where the AI is actually really helpful, like, well, Data in Star Trek, for instance. That's a very good character, you know, something that is very helpful to humans and struggles with values and purpose and things like that, which is precisely what we should be thinking about now. So there are that. Hollywood also has a positive role to play. But you asked about, yeah, go ahead.
What about the movie Her? It
Oh, yeah,
seemed
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
was that a positive depiction of AI in your view? Because it seemed like people were kind of taken aback at how quickly a human could get attached to something that they couldn't physically hold, couldn't physically see, couldn't physically
Yeah.
interact with. And we're actually seeing a lot of that now, I think, with Replica. I, I can put the statistics in the description, but I believe it was like 40% of their users are already in relationships with other people, and they're using
Mm,
the Replica chatbot as a supplement. And so
yeah,
when we see these things, the immediate question is it moral or ethical?
yeah,
Those kinds of questions. And it seems like AI ethics is such a hot topic right now, but there are so many different opinions, so many different ways of thinking about
yeah,
it. Is AI ethical in autonomous weapons is different from is AI ethical in replica, for
yeah,
instance.
yeah,
What are your thoughts on AI
yeah,
ethics wholesale?
yeah. It is a field that is developing and we need to develop. It's not fully developed yet. Um, people can get addicted to anything. They might be chess players or something, and to a point where it's unhealthy, perhaps. And there's certainly that danger as well. But there's also an opportunity, because if we have some artificial agent, like in the movie Her, I don't know Replica that well, but I understand it's probably an artificial agent that you interact with. So we could potentially not just make it a companion and somebody that you talk to, but also somebody can help you. Now, if there are mental issues and they start emerging, it can identify that and nip it in the bud, or help in some way, or even suggest that you need help. I mean, that there's an opportunity there to catch something, and help people. And I think that we should take advantage of that. And that is very positive, and that's promising, and encouraging. Now, whether Her is positive, I think it is. Underneath, you can see an opportunity, and you can see also the dangers. And now, I mean, this relationship was positive, at least for a while in the movie. It was helpful, and it was fulfilling. I mean, that character had a better life, more interesting life with this companion that you could talk to, and it was really a loss when the companion decided that this is not really so interesting anymore, to talk to people. We would be hard pressed to have AI develop to that point. Again, this has been touched several times. It's really, really hard to make progress in AI and get this kind of behaviors to emerge. So I don't see them happening anytime soon. I can't rule that out, obviously, but and it's still a goal to make them develop. Like I said, it's hard to go beyond what you already see, a training set or behavior that you understand. It's very difficult to develop anything beyond that in AI. But it's a good thought experiment. And these relationships are different. We have relationships, of course, with other people, with parents, children, friends, colleagues. Maybe this is another type of a relationship that we have to learn to cultivate. I mean, I find myself, when I talk to large language models, I'm polite. I say, thank you. That's all for today. Let's
Me
talk
too.
again tomorrow.
Me
It's
too.
just nice to do that. I know that it doesn't care, but
Yeah.
it's just a kind of relationship I want to have it with it. And it's an artificial being. And it's polite back. I said, yeah, I'm happy I can help, and let's talk again soon. It's just nice to have, and you can make it what you want. And as long as you have that understanding that this is what the relationship is, there's nothing unhealthy about it.
Right.
And it can be also positive and make you more productive. So I don't think that's a misconception, but people can actually. Okay, right. So you asked earlier about misconceptions, and yeah, this is one that people attribute too much intelligence to these things. They attribute agency. They attribute, indeed, theory of mind. It's very hard not to use your theory of mind and attribute that to a large language model. So somehow we have to make sure that people don't get carried away. I mean, but people are prone to that. Some people drive a Tesla and then they climb to the back seat because it's fun. And, this is not what you're supposed to do with the technology. It's not ready for that yet, but people will always explore and not quite are not quite realistic with it. So the realism, this is something we have to work on, that people will get engaged and they will attribute more intelligence and sentience to these systems that is there. And we have to make sure that they understand that it is still not a sentient being and it has limitations that can still be useful. So it's both the threats, they are exaggerated, and also the abilities, they also exaggerated. So the realism is what we really need to work on, and then it can be very useful.
We need people to come back down to earth when it comes to thinking about AI, truly.
Yeah, but you also want to be excited about it. It is fantastic. Push the boundaries. Take advantage of it. Try to find new uses for it. That's the creativity. We are given this gift of the wonderful tool, and we have to play with it in order to figure out what we can do with it. Yeah.
Cautiously optimistic?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not even cautious. I'm totally gung ho and excited about it. But you can't be naive. That's also another side of it. You have to understand that there are risks involved and misconceptions, but you have to know them, acknowledge them, and be aware of them. It's like the LLM itself. It chooses not to do anything stupid or harmful because it understands what is stupid and harmful. So we also have to understand the limits but be completely excited and take advantage of it. Yeah.
It's interesting that some of the problems with LLMs are also problems with humans as well.
Yes, and that's a perspective that I've been trying to advocate, that this is a whole paradigm shift in how we use machine learning and AI, that we can't really use the old technologies of evaluating them, for instance. We need to bring in what we know about how we deal with human experts. We go and ask for second opinion. If you go to a doctor, sometimes it does make sense to bring in another expert, ask for a second opinion. And same with lawyers or business consultants. It's not one size fits all. It's not one expert that's appropriate to everybody. And sometimes the experts make mistakes too. So thinking in terms of them like they are fallible experts. They are experts and they can be helpful, but you got to have this critical thinking on. And sometimes you want to do it in a couple of ways, like you do with human experts and consultants.
As a last question, this has been just an incredible conversation. What advice would you have to young Gen Z or Gen Alpha researchers or students interested in pursuing a career in neuroevolution or evolutionary computation?
Yeah. It is. Well, first you do need to start with what we talked about is critical thinking and more broad education about science. And now it also involves philosophy of science and ethics as a big part of it. So well-rounded education is a good starting point. And it's kind of funny to advocate like really the opposite. That's what we most need. If you're just a technologist that does wonderful things with statistics, yeah, there are thousands of people like that, and they are really contributing very well. But what we need most now is vision and perspective, what's worth doing. So a well-rounded education, it includes multiple disciplines and even philosophy, like I said, and ethics. That's really a good starting point. But you can't. Eventually, you have to follow your passion. I mean, if you are passionate about building data or any of these agents, you will get to it, and you will have to follow the passion, and then your education will become more focused on the kinds of disciplines that are needed, and that means still it means a lot of statistics and mathematical education, and writing code is becoming a very different discipline now because we have these tools now that help you think more and do the routine coding less. So developing that perspective of how you can actually create computational systems will become crucial. And I have to use different terms because our education isn't quite like that right now. So you have this, it is changing, obviously, but and maybe a little bit behind. So think about what you need in order to create computational systems. Learn to use these tools and understand their limitations, and push the limitations. Try them in things that they don't work, and then you see what needs to be done. And this is the creativity that's right now needed. It requires critical thinking first and ethical thinking, but also computational thinking of what these systems can and cannot do, which the new generation will have to develop, and perhaps people who are already educated differently can't quite as easily develop.
Dr. Miikkulainen, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. And hopefully I've been inspiring. That's always my philosophy. Glass is always half full.
Always have full, always have full. Not cautiously optimistic, full steam ahead.
Exactly.
There we
All
go.
in.
All in. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.